The idea of port security is limiting how many devices can be on a port on a switch. In this case, I've got a switch up here. We'll call this switch A, and it's got a port plugged into switch B. Switch B, in turn, has 3 computers hanging off of it. So I want this switch on port A to be able to remember 3 different MAC addresses. Now, we haven't really gone into how switches remember stuff. We might touch on that later on, I hope, if we have the time. But this port here has to remember the MAC addresses so that when traffic comes into this switch, it knows what port to send it out of in order to get to a specific PC. Well, what happens if a bad guy just he sends tons and tons and tons of bogus MAC addresses to this switch? Say this computer here has some malware on it or some hacking software on it that just sends thousands and thousands of MAC addresses. Well, I want to limit this guy to only 3 MAC addresses so he can't be overwhelmed and end up shutting down my network. So here are the various triggers that I can set this thing up for. I can set it for a maximum number of MAC addresses it can learn, 3 in this case. Or I can set one or more specific MAC addresses that it's allowed to learn. So in other words, I can take this MAC address, this MAC address, this MAC address, set those up on that port, and if anybody else plugs into it or sends any other MAC addresses are received on it, it will trigger whatever the response is that I set up. The third one I can set up is sticky. I can say, well, I want the first 3 here to stick, and then after that, no more. That way, these, as soon as I plug these in, they become the permanent addresses. I can't pull this computer off and put another computer on. I could have done that up here with the first trigger, because this can learn any 3 at a time. But in this case, it learns the first 3, and then after that will not learn any more, even if I switch one of these out. So those are the various kinds of triggers. As far as responses, I can set it up to protect. That's the lowest level, and the lowest level means the first go ahead and process the traffic from the first legitimate MAC address, but after that, just don't process anything from anything else. So if I give this 3 MAC addresses, it'll process those 3, but it just won't process any of the others. It'll just drop those. And that works fine, but it doesn't really log those events, and so it kind of defeats the purpose in that I can't come back later and find out what was going on. The second is to restrict, and that's similar to protect, except it means I also want you to log every event. And then the third one is to be able to shut down that port. Just shut it down, and then an administrator has to come along and bring it back up. That's always fun to do in the workplace, right? You say, well, that shouldn't, the guy calls you and says, my switch won't work, or I can't get on the network. Well, did you plug something else into the port? Oh, no, I didn't do that. Well, he did, right? Because that shut down, and because you can go and look at the status of that port, and you can tell it was a violation because of it gives you what the violation is in the status of that port. So you can shut down that port, and some switches are also able to just shut down the entire network if any of these are violated. So by default, as soon as you turn on port security, you have one MAC address allowed, 1 at a time. It can be any MAC address, but only 1 at a time. And the default violation is just to shut it down. We can change all those behaviors. Now I'm going to pass you on to another video that I found on YouTube that actually goes through a lot of what I've just said, but also goes through some of the commands that are involved in setting up port security.